bottom third of the harm scale.
Doesn't cause harm.
Well, it can for some people. Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the thing. We've got to be careful about our discussion about cannabis. No drug use of any description is completely harm-free. It's just relative. Coffee can cause harm, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should make it unlawful. I mean, we've got to be kind of honest about it.
Smoking the lungs or something.
There's a whole range of health harms. I mean, there will be some people, I mean, I'm getting a bit distracted, but there will be some people for whom they have personality or life issues that means that they're more likely to suffer emotional harm or mental harm. Those are very personal ones and cost to the individual and risk to them from different kinds of layers of problem, and then would assess the drug across all of those. And that was why cannabis tended to be very much at the bottom end and the other two sort of further up the top end, because assessed across a variety of different harms. But I don't have the models for you, so I can't really show it to you, which is, I'm sorry about that, because that would be more helpful and you'd be able to see it. There is work that was done by, I know that there has been work done by Doug Selman, who is very well, he's a psychiatrist, I think, but he's at Christchurch University up there at Canterbury, and he's done some work on an alternative model as well for looking at how to classify. So there is that work around in New Zealand and overseas. One of the things that disappointed me most about that Drug Foundation roundtable, the information was fantastic. There were experts from all sorts of areas there talking about drugs in a really rational, clean, kind of ordinary, sensible, logical way. Jim Anderton wasn't there. There was no Labour Party MPs there. And despite protestations to the contrary, Jim Anderton didn't attend any of those Drug Foundation sessions. So that opportunity for him to come face to face with the reality and the research and the science around it, he just didn't take the opportunity to do. There's been quite a bit of legislative erosion of around the cannabis issue, and Paul talked a little bit of it. They have effectively hobbled our ability to have a rational discussion about good quality cannabis policy in a political forum. There was the prohibition of utensils regulation that came in 1999, which effectively means that any potentially less harmful ways of consuming cannabis are now more unlawful than smoking it, than the more harmful ways. And so it's much more difficult now, and there's been sort of cases off and on of the cops busting shops for utensils, and there's quite a recent case now in Auckland where they've done another big bust of a grow your own shop up there. So that will work its way through the process, and you'll probably hear more about that in time. We've had the Proceeds of Crimes Act, which was devastating actually from a drug law reform point of view. It came into force in 2002. The Greens fought it and voted against it. It basically allows for the Crown to take a second bite at you. If they fail to prosecute you, so you haven't actually committed a crime, they can still take an application under Proceeds of Crimes Act to take your property on the basis of a civil burden of proof. So they can freeze your assets, and they can take those assets, they can expressly stop you using those assets to fund a defence.
Called justice.
Forcing you to rely on legal aid if you're eligible for it, and you may well not be. And it was fascinating that legislation got a clean Bill of Rights vet. All legislation essentially goes through, is assessed by the Attorney General to see whether it breaches the Bill of Rights. That legislation was not thought to breach the Bill of Rights. I have a members' bill on the order paper at the moment that would ban broadcast advertising of alcohol. It's part of the Green policy to get rid of advertising of alcohol, so it's similar to tobacco. That legislation, that bill, is most likely to fail a Bill of Rights vet and will be considered to breach the Bill of Rights because companies have a right to free speech, and that includes the right to advertise as they choose. So my bill to control the industry is in breach of the Bill of Rights. The Proceeds of Crimes Act was not. Yeah? Sorry?
How do they justify that being different from tobacco?
It's just a policy objective. You can still do it. On tobacco, it would still fail a Bill of Rights vet. But you make a policy decision as to whether or not you proceed with law regardless. So That's the thing, it puts us in the position. I mean, if that's how it comes out, and we expect that it would on our own assessment, then we would have to make a policy decision as the Green Party to pursue legislation that breaches the Bill of Rights because of this company right to free speech, or at least to advertising.
We're not going to be changed from the government in 100 years. What we should all do is just smoke openly, and no one would get busted again.
That's whether or not no one will get busted again. I mean, that's I don't know if that's true or not. I think the government could be forced to make change. They'd have to be forced to do it. They'd have to swallow a dead rat actually to do it, and be forced to have to do something they don't want to do. But this is politics, and that can happen. So it's a possibility still. But I'll continue on, and then we can have more of a talk because I talk about that a bit at the end. There were some other attempts at legislative reform that were better, that weren't an erosion. There's the Medpot bill, which I talked about this afternoon. Nandor controversially promoted a bill for spot fines in 2005. Some of you may remember that. It was widely opposed by the law reform movement, but it was in his defence, and he has been one of the most courageous, outspoken persons about cannabis law reform, I think, politically, we've ever seen. He was trying to find a way through the impasse, through the political stagnation, find a way where he could get other parties to agree to some kind of change, no matter how, just a small step away from the absolute prohibition that we have now. It failed. It failed in part because we didn't have support from the law reform movement, and it failed for want of a bigger campaign. There was no, it kind of came out of the blue and wasn't attached to any other process that was going on at the time, so it was very difficult to get political traction on it. So it didn't really go anywhere. But I think it was worthwhile noting what he said in his press release that he put out when the bill went into the ballot. And he said, "Today I issue a challenge to other political parties, support this bill or make it clear how they will resolve the prohibition crisis. Some politicians have explicitly said that simply being an idea from the Greens is a good enough reason to oppose it. They should grow up. They're supposed to be legislators charged with doing what's best for all New Zealanders." And that just sets out the political reality that we are all having to cope with. Any progress on cannabis law reform in any way is extremely difficult because of the agreement that the Labour Party has with United Future in particular, although there are other things as well. United Future opposes the harm reduction model. They've said explicitly that they oppose the ideology that public health policies and programs should be planned, funded and delivered within a harm minimisation strategy. That is not where they want to go. But the problem is it doesn't just stop us from pursuing legislative change, it actually stops us from having the proper debate. There were positive moves with the Select Committee inquiry in 2003, which Paul talked about. They did have some very good findings. They said that the aim of cannabis legislation should be to be focused on preventing underage use, that it should avoid criminalising non-problematic use. It was very critical of prohibition. Said that prohibition doesn't reduce use, and we know that that's true. Anybody who wants to can and does smoke it. That it makes targeting education much more difficult, facilitates the black market and exposes cannabis users to harder drugs, which is very helpful because that went to that whole gateway drug issue. And it was quite useful that they said that. But we haven't been able to progress the debate any further. There's been no political will to do it. Because the bald truth is that we need the numbers. You cannot get legislative change if you don't have numbers, more MPs for you than against you. Both New Zealand First and United Future have used their political leverage with Labour to lock the Greens out of making any real change. I mean, this happens in other areas other than cannabis law reform. I've been part of some of those backroom deals and watched it happen. It's enormously frustrating. But in cannabis law reform in particular, it has an enormously devastating effect for the community as a whole. Labour also relies on them, not as an excuse for choosing not to do anything, because they can say they've been prevented from doing it because of their agreements. And of course Labour have got Jim Anderton in their cabinet as well, and they need every single MP they can get. So they rely on all those three, United Future, New Zealand First and Jim Anderton, to keep them hogtied, and it means that they can make excuses. And of course, yeah.